In an isolated town of the American South, a fanatical religious community lived by the pages of a single scripture they believed to be divine. But the holy book had warped, its letters twisting like flesh and blood. Each time it was read aloud, it brought not salvation but horror. Joints sprouting from the wrong places, skin rotting away, eyes bulging from their sockets. And when the moon shone down on the rotting church, the grotesque truth was revealed. Their God was no deity at all, but an ancient parasite, feeding through every prayer, waiting to claim as its next host anyone foolish enough to draw near. Jonah Lawson drove along the dirt-red road, flanked on both sides by shadowed swamplands where daylight barely slipped through the trees. The silence was so heavy that the faintest sound, the fall of a leaf, the drone of an insect, echoed like a drum inside his chest. He had come here to investigate a rare religious community, whispered about in chilling rumors, an isolated town, bizarre rituals, and strange bodily deformities that plagued its believers. The village emerged like something abandoned by time. Weather-beaten wooden houses leaned under peeling paint, their windows coated with layers of grime. The people watched him pass with hollowed, stone-worn faces, their voices coarse as if scraped down to rock. Jonah felt as though he had crossed into another world, one where ordinary rules no longer applied. At the town's center stood the old church, its structure corroded from within. The wooden doors hung half open, leaking faint light, and the stench of melted wax mixed with something rancid and decaying. Jonah stepped inside, heart pounding. In the gloom, splintered pews lined the floor like broken teeth. The altar was crusted with dust and hardened wax, and yet, lying upon it, rested the community's only surviving Bible. Inside, a cluster of worshippers knelt on the floor, murmuring prayers. Jonah's breath caught when he noticed. Their skin split into jagged cracks, new joints bulging at unnatural angles, some eyes swelling grotesquely from their sockets. Yet, none of them cried out. Their voices droned on, steady, reverent. Each verse echoed through the church like invisible blades, slicing into flesh, and the convulsions of their bodies became part of the chant. Jonah staggered back, horrified. These mutations were not accidents, not illness. They were the direct consequence of the scripture itself. Every word recited was a knife, every prayer an incision. To the townsfolk, it was a miracle of God. But to Jonah, it was something else. A parasitic force, ancient and unholy, twisting bodies through its scripture. His flashlight caught the Bible on the altar. The letters writhed across the page, trembling and curling like veins under the skin, the sheen of dried blood clinging to the ink. A chill surged down his spine. He realized he stood in the heart of a grotesque covenant, an ancient pact festering behind this community's faith. Jonah inhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. But his pulse hammered on, a frantic reminder. He had crossed into the territory of something older than God, where scripture was not salvation but infection. And he knew, one wrong move, one stray syllable uttered aloud, and he too could be claimed as the next vessel, doomed. Jonah pressed himself into a shadowed corner of the church, eyes fixed on the preacher holding the tattered Bible. Its rough, blistered pages glimmered with a sickly red glow from the wax. The preacher's raspy voice rose and fell, merging with the faint groans of the kneeling worshippers, creating a grotesque, almost symphonic chant. A The woman kneeling near the altar suddenly convulsed. The skin on her arm split open, revealing dark, raw flesh beneath. Jonah's heartbeat spiked. Before he could make sense of it, an old man beside him whispered, "Do not fear, it is the blessing of the Lord." But Jonah could not look away. With each verse, joints twisted, ribs stretched in unnatural ways, eyes bulged or swelled grotesquely. Their bodies warped, yet their voices droned on. No screams, no pleas. Sweat and congealed blood mingled with the reek of rot, thickening the air into something suffocating. A moment later, the preacher turned toward Jonah, his eyes glinting with fervor. "You wish to hear as well, don't you? You want to understand the power of God." His tone rasped and cracked, but each word carried a supernatural weight, pulling Jonah in. Jonah trembled, but could not step back. He saw the writing on the page shift. The letters writhed like snakes slithering across the parchment. As the preacher read on, Jonah's body burned. His hands went numb, as though something inside was clawing for release. He stumbled back, but the floorboards quivered, and the congregation crept closer in unison. Their groans merged with the preacher's chant, the rhythm pounding against Jonah's skull. A strange sensation spread through him. His skin prickled, then turned numb. Jonah looked down. His knuckles twitched. His thumbs seemed to swell and split from his hand, as if a new joint were forming. In a heartbeat, he felt something alien threading through his veins. It wasn't pain. It was worse. A vile vitality taking root inside him. In the wavering glow, Jonah saw the others, deformed yet upright, mouths reciting scripture, eyes gleaming with twisted ecstasy. He realized this Bible was no vessel of salvation but a tool, an ancient parasite invading flesh, word by word, prayer by prayer. Sweat and blood dripped from his brow as he steadied himself. He knew one moment of weakness, one slip into the rhythm of those words, and he would no longer be human. In the chorus of groans and the preacher's rasping voice, Jonah understood. If he wished to survive, he would have to trace this rotten scripture back to its root. But here, every step was peril, every breath a potential offering to the ancient power that already ruled the faithful. Shah. Jonah could retreat no further. The stench of rot, dried blood, and burning wax pressed against his lungs, choking him. Each step seemed to sink into the rotting wooden floor, while the groans of the deformed worshippers merged with the scripture, a grotesque chorus not meant for the living. He noticed a small trapdoor beneath the altar. One brick was loose, revealing faint light spilling from below. On its surface, words had been carved, glowing faintly red like clotted blood. Jonah inhaled sharply, his trembling hand pushing the hatch open. A rush of cold air escaped, thick with decay. Yet underneath it, something pulsed with life. Descending, Jonah saw them. Countless half-rotten corpses still moving, their flesh sloughing away in wet strips. Eyes bulged from sockets, joints had sprouted extra hinges, skin peeled in ragged patches. A suffocating dread weighed down on his spirit. This was not illness, not ritual, but the direct handiwork of the ancient parasite. He staggered back, but the figures advanced slowly. Their whispers invaded his head. The scripture wasn't just on paper. It lived across their skin, etched into blood and bone, spreading through every breath. Each word was a root piercing into Jonah's flesh, making his skin sting, his joints ache, his blood clot beneath the surface. Jonah quivered, but forced himself to hide his fear. Observing closely, He realized these abominations retained a twisted consciousness. They murmured verses, howling with a mix of agony and ecstasy, eyes lit with an unnatural black glow. The parasite used the holy text as a tool of hypnosis, turning every believer into a living host, sustaining its existence through generations. Above, he heard the creak of collapsing boards, the preacher and his flock preparing the nightly ritual. Jonah knew this would be greater than anything before, something meant to unleash the parasite across the entire town. He had to escape, but every step risked attack. The corpses seemed to track him, ready to pounce at the slightest movement. He slipped deeper into the cellar and discovered a storeroom filled with old scripture pages. Many were caked with dried slime, their letters writhing faintly as though alive. Jonah flipped one page and felt a stabbing under his skin, as if the words themselves were burrowing into him. The verses crawled, hissing against the paper, and his heart clenched with dread. This parasite controlled everything through the book, through each syllable spoken aloud. Suddenly, a corpse reached out and touched his shoulder. Jonah flinched, blood rushing to his face. In a blink, the creature pulled back, but in his mind echoed a hideous moan, rotting scripture threading itself through his thoughts, verse by verse. He swallowed hard. Unless he destroyed the root of this corrupted Bible, the entire town and himself would be consumed as hosts. He froze in the cellar, eyes fixed on the stairway above. The ritual was about to begin. The faithful still believed this was a miracle. But Jonah knew the truth. The miracle was rotten from the inside out. If he did not act now, the parasite would spread unchecked, reshaping every living body into its brood. Below, the corpses moaned, the scriptures writhed, and Jonah understood. There was only one path left, to face the source of the rotting covenant directly, or die as its next vessel. No. Pull now. Jonah crept up from the cellar, every step echoing inside the decaying church. Above, enormous crimson candles bled their light into the suffocating air. The congregation was gathered, kneeling, their eyes gleaming with grotesque rapture as they muttered scripture under their breath. The preacher stood at the pulpit, his ragged voice booming. "Tonight, the Lord will bless us, through every soul offered." As his words fell, a slick tide of red wax oozed from the altar, curling around the worshippers' feet. Their skin shriveled, their limbs sprouted extra joints, eyes bulged from sockets, yet their mouths kept chanting, their voices unwavering, as though hypnotized. Jonah crouched in the shadows, sweat soaking his brow. He realized the parasite was no longer confined to their flesh. It saturated the entire church, seeping into the very air, lacing itself into every breath, every heartbeat. A chill swept through him as his own skin prickled, muscles tightening painfully. One worshipper staggered toward him, brushing a hand across Jonah's shoulder. Instantly his joints twitched, his skin swelled, nerves flared with agony as though something inside was splitting him apart. The groans of the congregation merged with scripture, pounding against his skull, dragging him to the brink of panic. The preacher sneered, his eyes blazing crimson. "You are the chosen. You shall become the final vessel to complete the covenant." Jonah knew then there was no turning back. They bound him to the altar, where beneath the wood and stone pulsed a massive mass of slime. Covered in weeping eyes and moaning mouths, its body throbbing in rhythm with the recited verses. Each word clung to Jonah's flesh, burrowing into bone, searing his skin, knotting his limbs into grotesque shapes. Blood thickened beneath his skin, bones strained as though sprouting anew. He screamed, Yet consciousness lingered, long enough to understand that the parasite did not want his death. It wanted his body alive, to be the seed for its spread. In one desperate, lucid moment, Jonah looked upon the deformed husks surrounding him, their chanting rattling in his ears. He made his choice. Straining against the ropes, he toppled a great candle, spilling fire onto the writhing red wax below. Flames roared upward, shrieks of scripture twisting into a chorus of agony as the entire church convulsed. The blaze consumed everything. Smoke choked the air. The warped faithful flailed in torment before collapsing into ash. Jonah crumpled, the stench of burning flesh filling his lungs as the last flame sputtered and darkness swallowed the room. But from within the ashes, a faint whisper lingered. The covenant is not broken. A warning that the parasite had not been destroyed, only silenced. For now. Nay. Ash choked the air, the acrid stench of smoke clawing into Jonah's lungs. He lay face down on the damp earth, sweat mixing with soot, hands trembling. The inferno had gutted most of the church, but the whispers lingered, soft and relentless, threading through his mind. The twisted husks of the faithful had withered in the blaze, yet Jonah knew the parasite was not destroyed. It had seeped into the ashes, into the half-burnt scriptures, waiting for a chance to bloom again. A prickling numbness spread through his body, skin cracking dry, limbs curling tight, heart hammering against his ribs. Every breath was a reminder that his life was being gnawed away from within. Forcing himself upright, Jonah fixed his gaze on the fragments of charred scripture drifting in the pale moonlight. His act had stopped a great ritual, sparing what remained of the town, but the cost was unbearable. Part of him was already infected, his hands roughened, bone pushing unnaturally against skin. He whispered to himself, as long as I breathe, as long as I remain myself, I must keep it from spreading. Yet, even in that rare silence, a long, worming murmur seeped out of the ashes. Rotted verses, writhing, curling into his ears like a hymn of horror. The flames had died, but the parasite endured. In dust, in paper, in every grain of ash. It had not been destroyed, only waiting for another body to claim. Jonah stumbled out of the ruin, his feet sinking into the wet soil, moonlight glinting on drifting motes of ash. The town was silent, as if nothing had happened. Yet he knew the parasite was still watching, still threading through every shadow. He was the only survivor, but also a carrier, marked by the covenant scar. The others were gone. The church lay in smoldering ruin. Jonah stood amidst the wreckage, staring up at the moon, crushed by a loneliness deeper than death. His survival was a hollow victory, haunted by whispers that refused to fade. He closed his eyes as pain lanced through his veins. He had lived, but part of him was forever altered, scarred by the parasite's touch. And in the southern night, the whisper of the rotten scripture lingered, faint, ceaseless, a warning that the covenant had never truly ended. Wah. In the quiet woods of Vermont, a family moved into a cheap wooden house, believing it would mend the fractures left by years of exhaustion. The scent of old ash clung to every grain of timber, and the slanted walls seemed to be listening. At night, the house groaned as though something shifted within its very bones. Footsteps echoed from a hallway that did not exist. Beyond the window, a flickering light revealed the silhouette of another house, one that had burned to the ground decades ago. yet it seemed still alive, still waiting for them to step inside. The narrow dirt road leading to the old wooden house seemed swallowed in mist. Tires crunched over layers of rotting leaves, leaving behind damp, faded tracks. The house appeared, small, yet heavy, sagging as though burdened by winters that had never truly ended. Its dark roof was mottled, its wooden walls bleached gray by wind, its windows jutting out like hollow, sunken eyes. Outside, the silence was so complete that the only sound was the wind threading through the trees, carrying with it the chill of decayed earth. The husband lingered on the porch, sensing a stifling presence in the air, as though the house were not empty at all, but waiting. The wife trailed behind, her eyes sweeping over every detail, half eager, half wary. Their daughter hurried ahead, feigning indifference, but her gaze kept darting toward the shadows that pooled in the cracks of the shutters. Inside, the smell of old ash mingled with mildew, thick and clinging, as if a fire had only recently been extinguished. The wooden floorboards groaned underfoot, the sound echoing unnaturally long for an empty room. On the right wall, a charred stain spread, gray-black, like a handprint pressed into the grain. A hallway stretched forward only to end abruptly against a blank wall, senseless, like a doorway that had been sealed shut. The wife froze, fingertips brushing the cold timber, feeling a hollow resonance from the other side. The window looked out toward the forest, but the view bent and warped like a fractured mirror. For a fleeting second, the dim reflection showed not the empty yard, but a long dining table, chairs gathered around it, an oil lamp flickering above a meal already set. When the wife blinked, only the thick canopy of mist-shrouded trees remained. That first night, the creaking never ceased, chairs and tables shifting in rooms that did not exist. Footsteps padded softly down the hallway, stopping just behind the sealed wall. The husband reassured himself. It was only the old house settling. Yet at times he felt cold breath grazing the back of his neck, though every window was shut tight. The wife lay still, listening to the faint clink of a spoon against glass echoing from nearby, a sound that rang once, then faded, leaving silence heavier than the dark itself. In the attic, dust lay thick, but small footprints pressed clear trails toward a corner where no exit existed. In a crumbling notebook found in a drawer, shaky handwriting scrawled a few desperate lines. The second house they never left. The page was torn, the ink blurred as though by tears. The house fell quiet again, but it was a silence damp, oppressive, swallowing every breath. And somewhere beyond the sealed wall, a faint sound stirred, the scrape of a chair being pulled out, ready for a guest who had just arrived. Yeah. Morning crept in slowly, its pale light swallowed by the thick veil of mist, leaving only scattered beams filtering through the windows. The wife tidied the living room, her hands carefully moving each worn object. Beneath the dusty rug, the floorboards revealed deep scratches, long grooves as if chairs and tables had been dragged across the wood. The marks were so fresh that tiny splinters still clung to them, as though someone had moved the furniture just the night before. The daughter wandered down the hallway, her gaze settling on a round window. The glass was cloudy, yet when she stared into it, the reflection was not the familiar room behind her. Instead, she saw another space, a long dining table draped in white cloth, chairs neatly arranged, oil lamps glowing invitingly. Faint silhouettes gathered around, their heads tilted as though in conversation. She raised her hand to the glass, but the surface was icy cold, reflecting only her own uneasy eyes. When she stepped back, The vision vanished, leaving behind only the cracked pane and its gray dust. On the second night, as the house fell still, the strange sounds rose again. The clink of spoons against glasses, the scrape of chairs dragged over wood, the muffled hum of a feast that never ended. Footsteps crept along the hallway, stopping just behind the sealed wall. A soft knocking began, measured, patient, as if someone were trying to open the door long buried. In the bedroom, the husband gazed into the mirror, weary eyes fixed on his own reflection. But for an instant, he was no longer alone. Behind him, the dining table shimmered into view. Chairs filled, shadowy figures lifting their glasses. They had no faces, only blurred voids. A pale hand rested on his shoulder in the glass, but when he turned, the room was empty, the mirror reflecting only his solitary frame. The wife could not sleep. At midnight, she wandered the hallway. The floor bowed gently beneath her steps, creaking like a heavy breath. She froze when she saw that the end of the corridor seemed longer than before. A door had appeared there, black, without a handle. As she approached, the narrow crack revealed only a fathomless dark beyond. From inside came whispers, layered voices overlapping, calling someone's name. She shut her eyes, and when she opened them, the wall was solid again, unbroken, as if nothing had changed. The next morning, the daughter sat quietly with her sketchbook. On the page was a drawing of their house, but inside it brimmed with chairs, lamps, and faceless guests. Their eyes were blank hollows. She shaded the doorway heavily, scrawling 2 words across the bottom: "Come in." Later, the husband searched the basement for tools. The dim light spilled over rough stone walls, where the floor was stained with old blackened ash. Sifting through it, he found a half-burned slip of paper. The trembling handwriting read, "They are still waiting at the table." By the third night, the house itself shuddered like a creature stirring awake. The lights flickered, shadows stretching unnaturally, the hallway lengthening with each passing minute. Laughter echoed faintly, distant yet growing clearer, as though the feast beyond the wall was reaching its liveliest moment. And from the depths of the dark came a drawn-out sound, scraping through the silence, the slow drag of a chair being pulled out, waiting for a new place to be filled. Harry. Morning came, but the light was too weak to chase away the chill. Inside the house, the space itself seemed to have shifted, though no one had touched a thing. Small objects, a stool, an old picture frame, a forgotten book on the table, moved subtly from their places. At times, they returned facing the wrong way, as though someone had used them and then set them back, but not quite right. The wife stood frozen in the living room. She watched the curtains stir, though no breeze passed, and beyond the glass appeared again the shadow of a glowing room. Inside it, the long table was now heavy with food, empty glasses raised in a silent toast. The faces remained pale and blurred, yet their presence was sharpening, growing more defined. When night fell, the sounds no longer came in scattered fragments, but in a relentless chorus. Footsteps circled the hallway, doors slammed from beyond the sealed wall, breaths seeped from imagined cracks. When the wife stepped into the corridor, she found it stretching farther than before. No wall stopped her this time. At the far end stood a strange wooden door, slightly ajar. From within, a fathomless darkness exhaled cold air that wrapped around her. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure moving in the shadows, but when she blinked, it was gone. Only a flat, silent wall remained. The daughter sank deeper into restless dreams. In them, She sat inside the other house, the one bathed in light. Around her gathered faceless guests, laughing, pouring wine, striking spoons against glasses in a celebration that never ended. Beside her, a seat was always kept empty, waiting. Each time she hesitated, laughter echoed, urging her to sit. When she woke, the sound of clinking glasses still lingered in her ears. The husband, desperate for answers, pored over architectural sketches he had found in the town library. There, he saw what could no longer be denied. This house once had a twin built alongside it. Decades ago, a wildfire consumed the other, yet its foundation was never unearthed. The final note from the architect chilled him. The two cannot be separated. One gone, one remains. The remaining will forever seek the one it lost. When darkness descended again, the house trembled faintly, like the beat of a heart. Shadows stretched long, clinging to the floor, as if trying to climb upward. For a fleeting moment, the family felt it together. They were no longer the owners of this place. The house was expanding, plank by plank, wall by wall, making room for another presence to press in. And somewhere in that deepening dark, another chair scraped back, pulled out, waiting for the one who had just been chosen. Ninda, damned. Night fell faster than usual. The last light of dusk was swallowed whole, leaving a dense darkness pressing in around the house. When the yellow ceiling lamp flickered on, it sputtered, its glow shivering as if being consumed by something unseen. The hallway now stretched unnaturally long, its damp, mottled walls carrying the weight of centuries. The wife pressed her face to the window pane, and this time it was no fleeting vision. Across the yard, the twin house stood clear, glowing bright as though in celebration. Its doors hung wide open, faceless silhouettes drifted in and out, glasses in hand, moving with an air of festivity. She saw the long table laden with food, steam curling upward, faint music drifting through the air, mingling with bursts of laughter. But when she blinked, it was gone. Only the motionless, black forest remained. The daughter could no longer resist the call of her dreams. At midnight, she vanished from her room. The wife, frantic, searched the house and froze at the sight before her. In what had always been an empty room, now stood the illuminated feast. Her daughter sat upright at the table, her eyes vacant, staring ahead. Around her, the faceless guests raised their glasses, tilting their heads in silent welcome. The wife stepped forward, but the air thickened like a veil, resisting her. She saw pale, bony hands settle on her daughter's shoulders, holding her gently, yet firmly, in place. Long white fingers tightened as the mother tried to press closer. The sound of the banquet swelled, echoing through the walls, laughter entwined with the clinking of spoons, a chorus welcoming their newest guest. The husband rushed in, desperate, reaching to pull his daughter back. But when his hands met her form, he felt only a frigid emptiness, slick as ice. Her body was fading, dissolving into another world. For a fleeting instant, he saw the second house in full, its wooden walls glowing, windows alight with fire, the banquet brimming with faceless revelers. Then it all blurred away, leaving only the dark, dust-choked room and a table draped in neglect. The wife collapsed to her knees, listening. From beyond the wall, the voices pressed harder, repeating their invitation in waves. Chairs scraped against the floor, many of them, as though the table were being set for more. The structure of their own home seemed to buckle, pushed aside, as another house forced itself into being within its walls. In that moment, the family understood. They were not merely living in an old cabin. They were sharing it, with another house, still standing, still full, still expanding, until the feast that had never ended was finally complete. Nay, dawn never came. Time itself seemed suspended in endless night, broken only by the jaundiced glow of a single lamp casting light over the frigid room. The wife stirred awake, only to realize she was no longer in the old creaking bed. She sat at a brightly lit banquet table, surrounded by faceless guests. The air reeked of wine, roasted meat, and burning wood, but the scents only thickened the suffocating atmosphere. The blank heads turned toward her in unison, featureless yet heavy with the weight of hundreds of unseen eyes. Through the window of this new house, she saw the outline of the old one, the home they had moved into, now sunken in shadow, hollow, drained of life. Only one figure remained there. Her husband sat slumped in the dim room, his eyes locked on the wall. He could hear every laugh, every clink of raised glasses from the other side. Within the chorus of sound, his wife's and daughter's voices rang out, familiar yet estranged, calling his name in a haunting harmony. He pressed his palm against the cold wall, and from the other side, pale hands pressed back. Tin like ice, fingers long and bony, clawed at the seams of the wood, pulling, tugging, prying open a crack. Light from the banquet spilled through, flickering like a beckoning flame. The slow scrape of a chair echoed, deliberate, preparing for one final guest. The husband staggered back, trembling, but the house did not allow escape. The walls closed in, the hallway shortened. The ceiling sank lower, pressing the breath from his chest. The attic groaned, dust drifting down like glowing cinders in the dim light. All of it drove him back toward the widening fracture, where shadow and light shimmered together like a door ajar. Through the gap, he saw his wife and daughter seated side by side, their forms fading but recognizable. Their faces, however, were dissolving into pale voids, merging with the faceless beings gathered at the table. Though empty, they tilted their heads and raised their glasses in unison, offering an invitation impossible to resist. The laughter swelled, rising, shattering, drowning out the pounding of his heart. In his final moment, he laid his hand upon the crack. The door burst wide, golden light pouring through, swallowing the last remnants of darkness. The sound of a chair scraping out one final time groaned through the air, and then fell silent. The small wooden house in Vermont sank into utter stillness. Outside, the forest lay heavy with mist, unmoving, as though no one had ever lived there at all. But if one were to stand close at night, pressing an ear to the mildewed wall, they might still hear it. The clink of spoons against glasses, the scrape of chairs sliding back, and the endless banquet echoing from the twin house, where those who chose to sit down never rose again. Nah. In the desolate countryside of the Midwest, a weathered radio station stands abandoned by the roadside, left to rot after a fire 20 years ago. Yet every midnight, the airwaves around the town carry a voice, a low, hollow broadcaster's tone, cold as static. He warns listeners to lock their doors, then begins reading a list of names belonging to those long dead. And anyone who dares to listen through the entire program before sunrise disappears without a trace, as if pulled straight into the invisible currents of the broadcast. Daniel Carter drove his old car through the low Midwestern hills, the empty highway stretching on as if without end. Once, he had been a well-regarded investigative journalist. But in recent years, his reputation had faded. Assignments grew scarce. His last article had been rejected by the paper, and now he knew he had only one chance left. A story haunting enough to make waves, or he would vanish into obscurity forever. Rumors about the haunted radio station drifted through online forums and in scraps of gossip from the locals. It broadcasts every night. If you listen until the end, you never wake up again. Part of Daniel suspected it was just another urban legend. But another part hoped, if the strange phenomenon was real, it would be the story of his career. "You mean the station?" The woman at the counter hesitated, eyes darting as though afraid someone might overhear. "Don't go near it. People have died because of it. Don't be foolish enough to listen." When Daniel pressed her, she only shook her head, slammed the ledger shut, and refused to speak further. That silence only drew him deeper. He rented a modest room on the town's edge, where the elderly innkeeper warned him with the same half-whisper, "When night falls, don't turn on the radio." But in Daniel's suitcase, an old shortwave receiver already waited. That night, a little past 11:30, Daniel sat at a rickety wooden desk, slowly turning the knobs. The static crackled like rainfall. 11:58. At the stroke of midnight, the dial at 96.3 suddenly came through, unnaturally clear. A man's voice filled the room, deep and measured, sounding as though it belonged to no particular era. "Good evening, listeners. Tonight, stay inside, lock your doors. Out there, something waits." Daniel shuddered. The tone did not waver. It carried the weight of command. Then, the broadcast shifted. The voice began to read names, each spoken slowly, like tolling church bells. Mary Collins, Joseph Hale, Thomas Reed. Daniel scribbled them quickly into his notebook, his heartbeat quickening. The list stretched on for nearly 10 minutes. But then came one name that froze him in place. Henry Alden, the very man he had met earlier that afternoon at the general store, the one who had quietly warned him, "Don't go near it." The program ended abruptly with a long burst of static. Then silence. Daniel sat unmoving for hours, eyes locked on the radio, ears still echoing with that strange voice. He told himself it was only a hoax, a trick transmission, some elaborate prank. But deep down, a chill rooted itself in his bones. He had brushed against something that was never meant to be touched. At 3 a.m., Daniel finally closed his notebook. Tomorrow morning, he would find Henry Alden. If the man was still alive, then all of this was nothing more than superstition. But if not, it would mean the legend had already stepped out of the shadows, and Daniel had heard a warning whispered from the other side of death. The next morning, Daniel went to the wooden house where Henry Alden lived. The door was shut tight, curtains drawn, no light escaping from within. He knocked, calling Henry's name. Silence. An elderly neighbor across the street stepped out and shook his head slowly. "Mr. Alden, he hasn't been seen since last night. The door's still locked, but he's gone." The words chilled Daniel's spine. The death list was no joke. It carried some kind of power, a hidden hand erasing people from existence. He went to the town's small library to dig deeper. Faded newspapers told the story of the 1983 fire that destroyed the Dagwakshi X radio station. Every staff member on the night shift had perished. None escaped. Locals whispered that their ashes had merged with the radio waves, becoming the very thing that still echoed at midnight. By late afternoon, Daniel passed the old general store again. The woman from the day before looked at him with a mix of pity and dread. "You listened, didn't you?" she whispered. "Don't turn it on again. Once it speaks your name, your soul belongs to it." Before Daniel could ask more, she turned away quickly, as though afraid someone or something was listening. That night, in his motel room, Daniel could not resist the temptation. He switched on the radio, tuning carefully to 96.3 DOI. The announcer's voice returned, clear and haunting. "Tonight, stay inside. Listen well." The list began again. This time, the names were more familiar. Daniel recognized at least 3 people from town he had seen that very day. Between the pauses, faint, overlapping whispers seeped through, like dozens of voices weeping within the static. And at the end, the broadcaster let out a drawn, guttural laugh that froze Daniel's blood. The program ended. Silence filled the room once more. But Daniel knew it was only the surface. Beneath it, something was moving, waiting for the next night to call more names. He closed his notebook, his palms slick with sweat. Yet instead of retreating, his reporter's instinct drove him further. He had to go to the abandoned radio station. Only there could Daniel hope to uncover the source of this nightmare. City, Ali. The road leading to the abandoned radio station was overgrown with weeds and pitted with potholes, as if the entire town had conspired to erase it from memory. The 2-story concrete building sagged under a gray sky, its windows shattered, its antenna bent like brittle bones. Daniel parked, drew a deep breath, and stepped inside. Dust coated everything. The hallways were dark, the walls scarred with burns. At the end of the corridor lay the recording booth, its wooden door half charred, but still intact. Daniel swept his flashlight across the room. The old microphone still stood on the desk, layered in dust, as though waiting for someone to return. Scattered tapes littered the floor, many warped and blackened by fire. He picked up one of the few intact reels and slid it into the machine. A burst of static screeched, then gave way to broken sounds. Frantic cries for help, muffled sobbing, and suddenly a rasping laugh. The very same laugh Daniel had heard over the midnight broadcast. A shiver ran down his spine. The sounds were not merely recordings. They seemed to bleed through the present, echoing out of the darkness itself. He stopped the machine quickly, but his ears still rang with that unnatural resonance. Turning, his flashlight caught the back wall. Scrawled there in charred black letters were the words, "Whoever listens becomes part of the signal. Whoever joins the signal never returns." The writing was shaky, desperate. Daniel left the booth, heart hammering. In the adjacent storage room, he found a stack of burned personnel files, a roster of the night shift staff from 1983. Every name matched those he had already heard in the broadcasts. There was no longer any doubt. The announcer's voice was the echo of the dead. Outside, Daniel gulped the damp air, trying to shake off the suffocating weight. Yet the shadows pressing against the building seemed thicker, heavier. In the wind, he thought he heard whispers, fragments of voices overlapping, as though a crowd of unseen souls was still trapped within the station's scorched concrete walls. Daniel knew he had gone too far. And the most terrifying thought was this: the broadcast might not stop at calling other names. One night soon it might call his. Oh. The third night in town, Daniel sat before the old radio, the red glow of the clock reading 11:59. He had promised himself he would never listen again, yet his trembling hand still reached for the dial. The radio seemed to have its own gravity. an open, black doorway he could not resist. 12-0 door. The static cleared. The announcer's familiar voice filled the room, cold and resolute. Good evening, listeners. Tonight, the souls are ready. The list began. Each name rang out, stretched long like a funeral bell. Daniel scribbled in his notebook, but halfway through, the pen slipped from his hand. The voice slowed, paused. The silence pressed down like ice. Daniel Carter. He froze. His heart hammered against his ribs, sweat pouring down his face. For the first time, the broadcast had spoken a living name. His name. The name of a man sitting right here, hearing every syllable of his fate. The room shifted. Shadows expanded and contracted like breathing lungs. In the small mirror on the wall, Daniel's reflection vanished, replaced by the charred, hollow-eyed face of the announcer from decades past. The man's lips moved in perfect sync with the voice spilling from the radio. You have listened. You belong to us. Daniel screamed, hurling the radio to the floor. But the sound did not stop. The broadcast bled from the outlets, from the wires in the walls, even from the hiss of wind outside the window. The whole town had become a single, enormous speaker, and every whisper carried the same name, Daniel Carter. He bolted into the night, sprinting across the empty road toward the abandoned station. If there was a way out, it had to be at the source. But the sky above burned crimson, the moon casting its pale, deathly glow across the rooftops. In that light, Daniel saw figures staggering into the street, faces he recognized from the lists. They were no longer alive, but echoes of flesh and bone, murmuring in unison. You will broadcast with us. Daniel pushed harder, lungs aflame, but deep inside he knew the truth. Once his name had been spoken on the airwaves, the door home was already closed. Nai. Dai. Daniel burst through the scorched wooden doors of the radio station. The recording booth was swallowed in darkness, dust thick in the air. But on the desk, the old microphone glowed faintly, as if it had just been switched on. The transmitter light blinked red, in rhythm with his own pounding heart. I don't belong to you, he shouted, his voice ragged. But the words immediately echoed back through the speakers, distorted, delayed, broadcast live. He heard himself laughing, a hoarse, broken sound that warped into the announcer's voice. Daniel lunged at the microphone, trying to rip it free, but his hand stuck fast to the frozen metal. A searing current tore through him. Memories ripped loose, childhood faces, fragments of love, every moment of his life, sucked into the invisible hum of the airwaves. Outside the window, the figures gathered. They shuffled closer, hollow-eyed, their mouths moving in unison. Daniel Carter broadcast with us. Their chant merged with the static of the radio, a grotesque chorus of the damned. He fought, but the more he struggled, the less of him remained. His body blurred, bones and blood dissolving into vibration, fading into the signal. Daniel screamed one final time, but the cry did not leave his lips. Instead, it rang clear through the radio on the floor. Then silence. The microphone's glow died. Daniel was gone. Only his notebook remained on the desk, its last page smeared with sweat and trembling words. If you hear your name, run, never stay. That midnight, on frequency 96.3, the announcer's voice returned. But this time, between the roll call of the dead, another voice joined in. Newer, younger, trembling at first, then steady. It was Daniel, his voice now part of the eternal broadcast. Good evening, listeners. Tonight, lock your doors and listen. Outside, the sun would rise as always. The town would endure, but anyone who tuned their radio to 96.3 at midnight would hear Daniel reading names that would never end. And the signal would never die. Ha! Kelly!